Chapter 37. The Last Shirt, Mooning Around, Sailing Orders, the Witch Pie. That was all fixed. So then we went away and went to the rubbage pile in the backyard where they keep the old boots and rags and pieces of bottles and worn-out tin things and all such truck, and scratched around and found an old tin washpan, and stopped up the holes as well as we could to bake the pie in, and took it down cellar and stole it full of flour and started for breakfast, and found a couple of shingle-nails that Tom said would be handy for a prisoner to scrabble his name and sorrows on the dungeon walls with, and dropped one of them in Aunt Sally's apron pocket, which was hanging on a chair, and t'other we stuck in the band of Uncle Silas's hat, which was on the bureau, because we heard the children say their ma and pa was going to the runaway nigger's house this morning, and then went to breakfast, and Tom dropped the pewter spoon in Uncle Silas's coat pocket, and Aunt Sally wasn't come yet, so we had to wait a little while. And when she come, she was hot and red and cross, and couldn't hardly wait for the blessing, and then she went to sluicing out coffee with one hand and cracking the handiest child's head with her thimble with the other, and says, "I've hunted high and I've hunted low, and it does beat all what has become of your other shirt." My heart fell down amongst my lungs and livers and things, and a hard piece of corn crust started down my throat after it got met on the road with a cough, and was shot across the table, and took one of the children in the eye, and curled him up like a fishing worm, and let a cry out of him the size of a war-whoop, and Tom he turned kind of blue around the gills, and it all amounted to a considerable state of things for about a quarter of a minute or as much as that, and I would have sold out for half price if there was a bidder. But after that we was all right again. It was the sudden surprise of it that knocked us so kind of cold. Uncle Silas, he says, "It's most uncommon curious. I can't understand it. I know perfectly well I took it off, because—" "Because you hain't got but one on. Just listen at the man. I know you took it off, and know it by a better way than your wool-gathering memory, too, because it was on the clothesline yesterday. I see it there myself. But it's gone. That's the long and the short of it. And you'll just have to change to a red flannel one till I can get time to make a new one. And it'll be the third I've made in 2 years. It just keeps a body on the jump to keep you in shirts, and whatever you do manage to do with them all is more'n I can make out. A body'd think you would learn to take some sort of care of 'em at your time of life." "I know it, Sally. I do try all I can. But it oughtn't to be altogether my fault, because, you know, I don't see them nor have nothing to do with them except when they are on me, and I don't believe I've ever lost one of them off of me." "Well, it ain't your fault if you haven't, Silas. You'd 'a' done it if you could, I reckon, and the shirt ain't all that's gone, nother. There's a spoon gone, and that ain't all. There was 10, now there's only 9. The calf got the shirt, I reckon, but the calf never took the spoon, that's certain." "Why, what else is gone, Sally?" "There's 6 candles gone, that's what. The rats could 'a' got the candles, and I reckon they did. I wonder they don't walk off with the whole place, the way you're always going to stop their holes and don't do it, and if they weren't fools they'd sleep in your hair, Silas. You'd never find it out. But you can't lay the spoons on the rats, and that I know." "Well, Sally, I'm in fault, and I acknowledge it. I've been remiss, but I won't let tomorrow go by without stopping up them holes." "Oh, I wouldn't hurry. Next year'll do." "Matilda Angelina Araminta Phelps!" Whack comes the thimble, and the child snatches her claws out of the sugar bowl without fooling around any. Just then the nigger woman steps on to the passage and says, "Missus, dey's a sheet gone." "A sheet gone? Well, for the land's sake—" "I'll stop up them holes to-day," says Uncle Silas, looking sorrowful. "Oh, do shut up. S'pose the rats took the sheet? Where's it gone, Lize?" "Cloud o' goodness, I hain't no notion, Miss Sally. She was on de clo'line yisterday, but she done gone. She ain't dah no mo' now." "I reckon the world is coming to an end. I never see the beat of it in all my born days. A shirt, and a sheet, and a spoon, and 6 Missus," comes a young yaller wench, "dey's a brass candlestick missin'." "Clear out from here, you hussy, or I'll take a skillet to you." Well, she was just a biling. I begun to lay for a chance. I reckoned I would sneak out and go for the woods till the weather moderated. She kept a raging right along, running her insurrection all by herself, and everybody else mighty meek and quiet, and at last Uncle Silas, looking kind of foolish, fishes up that spoon out of his pocket. She stopped with her mouth open and her hands up, and as for me, I wished I was in Jerusalem or somewheres, but not long, because she says, "It's just as I expected. So you had it in your pocket all the time, and like as not you've got the other things there, too. How'd it get there?" "I really don't know, Sally," he says, kind of apologizing, "or you know I would tell. I was a-studying over my text in Acts 17 before breakfast, and I reckon I put it in there not noticing, meaning to put my Testament in. And it must be so, because my Testament ain't in, but I'll go and see, and if the Testament is where I had it, I'll know I didn't put it in, and that will show that I laid the Testament down and took up the spoon and—" "Oh, for the land's sake, give a body a rest. Go 'long now, the whole kit and bilin' of you, and don't come nigh me again till I've got back my peace of mind." I'd 'a' heard her if she'd 'a' said it to herself, let alone speaking it out, and I'd 'a' got up and obeyed her if I'd 'a' been dead. As we was passing through the settin' room, the old man he took up his hat, and the shingle-nail fell out on the floor, and he just merely picked it up and laid it on the mantel-shelf, and never said nothing, and went out. Tom see him do it, and remembered about the spoon, and says, "Well, it ain't no use to send things by him no more, he ain't reliable." Then he says, "But he done us a good turn with a spoon, anyway, without knowing it, and so we'll go and do him one without him knowing it, stop up his rat-holes." There was a noble good lot of them down cellar, and it took us a whole hour, but we done the job tight and good and ship-shape. Then we heard steps on the stairs, and blowed out our light and hid, and here comes the old man, with a candle in one hand and a bundle of stuff in t'other, looking as absent-minded as year before last. He went a-mooning around, first to one rat-hole and then another, till he'd been to them all. Then he stood about 5 minutes, picking tallow-drip off of his candle and thinking. Then he turns off slow and dreamy toward the stairs, saying, "Well, for the life of me I can't remember when I done it. I could show her now that I weren't to blame on account of the rats, but never mind, let it go. I reckon it wouldn't do no good." And so he went on a-mumbling upstairs, and then we left. He was a mighty nice old man, and always is. Tom was a good deal bothered about what to do for a spoon, but he said we'd got to have it, so he took a think. When he had ciphered it out, he told me how we was to do. And then we went and waited around the spoon-basket till we see Aunt Sally coming, and then Tom went to counting the spoons and laying them out to one side, and I slid one of them up my sleeves, and Tom says, "Why, Aunt Sally, there ain't but 9 spoons yet." She says, "Go 'long to your play, and don't bother me. I know better. I counted myself." "Well, I've counted them twice, auntie, and I can't make but 9." She looked out of all patience, but of course she come to count. Anybody would. "I declare to gracious there ain't but 9," she says. "Why, what in the world! Plague take the things, I'll count 'em again." So I slipped back the one I had, and when she got done counting, she says, "Hang the troublesome rubbage, there's 10 now," and she looked huffy and bothered both. But Tom says, "Why, auntie, I don't think there's 10. You numbskull, didn't you see me count 'em?" "No, but—" "Well, I'll count 'em again." So I smooched one, and they come out 9, same as the other time. Well, she was in a tearing way, just a trembling all over, she was so mad. But she counted and counted till she got that addled she'd start to count in the basket for a spoon sometimes, and so 3 times they come out right, and 3 times they come out wrong. Then she grabbed up the basket, slammed it across the house, and knocked the cat galley west, and she said clear out and let her have some peace, and if we come bothering around her again betwixt that and dinner she'd skin us. So we had the odd spoon, and dropped it in her apron pocket while she was a-giving us our sailing orders, and Jim got it all right, along with her shingle-nail, before noon. We was very well satisfied with this business, and Tom allowed it was worth twice the trouble it took, because he said now she couldn't ever count them spoons twice alike again to save her life, and wouldn't believe she'd counted them right if she did, and said that after she'd about counted her head off for the next 3 days, he judged she'd give it up and offer to kill anybody that wanted her to ever count them any more. So we put the sheet back on the line that night, and stole one out of her closet, and kept on putting it back and stealing it again for a couple of days, till she didn't know how many sheets she had any more, and she didn't care, and weren't a-going to bullyrag the rest of her soul out about it, and wouldn't count them again not to save her life, she'd druther die first. So we was all right now, as to the shirt and the sheet and the spoon and the candles, by the help of the calf and the rats and the mixed-up counting, and as to the candlestick, it warn't no consequence, it would blow over by and by. But that pie was a job. We had no end of trouble with that pie. We fixed it up away down in the woods, and cooked it there, and we got it done at last, and very satisfactory, too, but not all in one day, and we had to use up 3 washpans full of flour before we got through, and we got burnt pretty much all over in places, and eyes put out with the smoke, because, you see, we didn't want nothing but a crust, and we couldn't prop it upright, and she would always cave in. But of course we thought of the right way at last, which was to cook the ladder, too, in the pie. So then we laid in with Jim the second night, and tore up the sheet all in little strings and twisted them together, and long before daylight we had a lovely rope that you could 'a' hung a person with. We let on it took 9 months to make it. And in the forenoon we took it down to the woods, but it wouldn't go into the pie. Being made of a whole sheet that way, there was rope enough for 40 pies if we'd 'a' wanted them, and plenty left over for soup, or sausage, or anything you choose. We could 'a' had a whole dinner. We didn't need it. All we needed was just enough for the pie, and so we throwed the rest away. And we didn't cook none of the pies in the washpan, afraid the solder would melt. But Uncle Silas he had a noble brass warming-pan which he thought considerable of, because it belonged to one of his ancestors, with a long wooden handle that come over from England with William the Conqueror in the Mayflower, or one of them early ships, and was hid away up garret with a lot of other old pots and things that was valuable, not on account of being any account, because they weren't, but on account of them being relicts, you know. And we snaked her out private, and took her down there, but she failed on the first pies, because we didn't know how, but she come up smiling on the last one. We took and lined her with dough, and set her in the coals, and loaded her with rag rope, and put on a dough roof, and shut down the lid, and put hot embers on top, and stood off 5 foot, with a long handle, cool and comfortable, and in 15 minutes she turned out a pie that was a satisfaction to look at. But the person that et it would want to fetch a couple of kegs of toothpicks along, for if that rope ladder wouldn't cramp him down to business, I don't know nothing what I'm talking about, and lay him in enough stomach ache to last him till next time, too. Nat didn't look when we put the witch pie in Jim's pan, and we put the 3 tin plates in the bottom of the pan under the vittles, and so Jim got everything all right, and as soon as he was by himself he busted into the pie, and hid the rope ladder inside of his straw tick, and scratched some marks on a tin plate, and throwed it out of the window-hole. Chapter 38. The Coat of Arms, A Skilled Superintendent, Unpleasant Glory, A Tearful Subject. Making them pens was a distressed tough job, and so was the saw, and Jim allowed the inscription was going to be toughest of all. That's the one which the prisoner has to scrabble on the wall. But he had to have it. Tom said he'd got to. There weren't no case of a state prisoner not scrabbling his inscription to leave behind, and his coat of arms. "Look at Lady Jane Grey," he says. "Look at Guilford Dudley. Look at old Northumberland. Why, Huck, s'pose it is considerable trouble. What are you going to do? How are you going to get around it? Jim's got to do his inscription and coat of arms. They all do." Jim says, "Why, Mars Tom, I hain't got no coat arm. I ain't got nothing but dish here old shirt, and you knows I got to keep the journal on dat." "Oh, you don't understand, Jim. A coat of arms is very different." "Well," I says, "Jim's right anyway, when he says he hain't got no coat of arms, because he ain't." "I reckon I know that," Tom says, "but you bet he'll have one before he goes out of this, because he's going out right. There ain't going to be no flaws in his record." So whilst me and Jim filed away at the pens on a brickbat apiece, Jim a-making his'n out of the brass and I making mine out of the spoon, Tom set to work to think out the coat of arms. By and by he said he'd struck so many good ones he didn't hardly know which to take, but there was one which he reckoned he'd decide on. He says, On the scutcheon we'll have a bend, or the Dexter bass, a saltire Murray in the fess, with a dog, couchant, for common charge, and under his foot a chain embattled for slavery, with a chevron vert in a chief engrailed, and 3 invected lines on a field azure, with the nombril points rampant on the dancet indented. Crest, a runaway nigger, Sable, with his bundle over his shoulder on a bar sinister, and a couple o' gules for supporters, which is you and me. Motto, Maggiore fretta, minore auto. Got it out of a book. Means the more haste, the less speed. Gee willikins, I says, but what does the rest of it mean? We ain't got no time to bother over that, he says. We got to dig in like all get out. Well, anyway, I says, what's some of it? What's a fess? A fess? A fess is— You don't need to know what a fess is. I'll show him how to make it when he gets to it. Shucks, Tom, I says, I think you might tell a person. What's a bar sinister? Oh, I don't know, but he's got to have it. All the nobility does. That was just his way. If it didn't suit him to explain a thing to you, he wouldn't do it. You might pump at him a week, it wouldn't make no difference. He'd got all that coat of arms business fixed, so now he started in to finish up the rest of that part of the work, which was to plan out a mournful inscription. Said Jim got to have one, like they all done. He made up a lot and wrote them out on a paper and read them off. So, 1. Here a captive heart busted. 2. Here a poor prisoner, forsook by the world and friends, fretted his sorrowful life. 3. Here a lonely heart broke, and a worn spirit went to its rest after 37 years of solitary captivity. 4. Here, homeless and friendless, after 37 years of bitter captivity, perished a noble stranger, natural son of Louis XIV. Tom's voice trembled whilst he was reading them, and he most broke down. When he got done, he couldn't no way make up his mind which one for Jim to scrabble onto the wall, they was all so good. But at last he allowed he would let him scrabble them all on. Jim said it would take him a year to scrabble such a lot of truck onto the logs with a nail, and he didn't know how to make letters besides. But Tom said he would block them out for him, and then he wouldn't have nothing to do but just follow the lines. Then pretty soon he says, "Come to think, the logs ain't a-going to do. They don't have log walls in a dungeon. We got to dig the inscriptions into a rock. We'll fetch a rock." Jim said the rock was worse than the logs. He said it would take him such a pison long time to dig them into a rock he wouldn't ever get out. But Tom said he would let me help him do it. Then he took a look to see how me and Jim was getting along with the pens. It was most pesky tedious hard work and slow, and didn't give my hands no show to get well of the sores, and we didn't seem to make no headway hardly. So Tom says, "I know how to fix it. We got to have a rock for the coat of arms and mournful inscriptions, and we can kill 2 birds with that same rock. There's a gaudy big grindstone down at the mill, and we'll smooch it and carve the things on it, and file out the pens and the saw on it, too." It weren't no slouch of an idea, and it weren't no slouch of a grindstone, nuther, but we allowed we'd tackle it. It warn't quite midnight yet, so we cleared out for the mill, leaving Jim at work. We smooched the grindstone and set out to roll her home, but it was a most nation tough job. Sometimes, do what we couldn't keep her from falling over, and she come mighty near mashing us every time. Tom said she was going to get one of us, sure, before we got through. We got her halfway, and then we was plumb played out, and most drowned with sweat. We see it weren't no use. We got to go and fetch Jim, so he raised up his bed and slid the chain off the bed leg and wrapped it around and around his neck, and we crawled out through our hole and down there, and Jim and me laid into that grindstone and walked her along like nothing, and Tom superintended. He could out-superintend any boy I ever see. He knowed how to do everything. Our hole was pretty big, but it weren't big enough to get the grindstone through. But Jim, he took the pick and soon made it big enough. Then Tom marked out them things on it with a nail, and set Jim to work on them, with a nail for a chisel and an iron bolt from the rubbage in the lean-to for a hammer, and told him to work till the rest of his candle quit on him, and then he could go to bed, and hide the grindstone under his straw tick and sleep on it. Then we helped him fix his chain back on the bed leg, and was ready for bed ourselves. But Tom thought of something, and says, "You got any spiders in here, Jim?" "No, sah. Thanks to goodness I hain't, Mars Tom." "All right, we'll get you some." "But bless you, honey, I don't want none. I's afeard of 'em. I just as soon have rattlesnakes around." Tom thought a minute or two, and says, "It's a good idea, and I reckon it's been done. It must have been done. It stands to reason. Yes, it's a prime good idea. Where could you keep it?" "Keep what, Mars Tom?" "Why, a rattlesnake." "De goodness gracious alive, Mars Tom, why, if dey was a rattlesnake to come in here, I'd take and bust right out through dat long wall, I would, wid my head." "Why, Jim, you wouldn't be afraid of it after a little. You could tame it." "Tame it?" "Yes, easy enough. Every animal is grateful for kindness and petting, and they wouldn't think of hurting a person that pets them. Any book will tell you that. You try, that's all I ask. Just try for 2 or 3 days. Why, you can get him so, in a little while, that he'll love you, and sleep with you, and won't stay away from you a minute, and will let you wrap him around your neck and put his head in your mouth." "Please, Mars Tom, don't talk so. I can't stand it. He'd let me shove his head into my mouth for a favor, ain't it? I lay he'd wait a powerful long time 'fore I asked him, and more'n that, I don't want him to sleep with me." "Jim, don't act so foolish. A prisoner's got to have some kind of a dumb pet, and if a rattlesnake hain't ever been tried, why, there's more glory to be gained in your being the first to ever try it than any other way you could ever think of to save your life." "Why, Mars Tom, I don't want no sich glory. Snake take and bite Jim's chin off, den why is de glory? No, sah, I don't want no sich doin's."
"Blame it, can't you try? I only want you to try. You needn't keep it up if it don't work."
"But de trouble all done if de snake bite me while I's tryin' him. Mars Tom, I's willin' to tackle mos' anything 'at ain't onreasonable, but if you and Huck fetches a rattlesnake in here for me to tame, I's gwine to leave, that's shore."
"Well, then let it go. Let it go, if you're so bullheaded about it. We can get some garter snakes, and you can tie some buttons on their tails and let on they're rattlesnakes, and I reckon they'll have to do."
"I can stand dem, Mars Tom, but blame if I couldn't get along without 'em, I can tell you that. I never knowed before 'twas so much bother and trouble to be a prisoner."
"Well, it always is when it's done right. You got any rats around here?"
"No, sir, I ain't seed none."
"Well, we'll get you some rats."
"Why, Mars Tom, I don't want no rats. Dey's de dad-blamedest creeturs to disturb body and rustle round over him and bite his feet when he's tryin' to sleep I ever see. No, sah, gimme garter snakes if I's got to have 'em, but don't gimme no rats. I ain't got no use for 'em scasely."
"But, Jim, you got to have 'em. They all do. So don't make no more fuss about it. Prisoners ain't ever without rats. There ain't no instance of it. And they train them and pet them and learn them tricks, and they get to be as sociable as flies. But you got to play music to them. You got anything to play music on?"
"I ain't got nuffin but a coarse comb and a piece of paper, and a juice harp, but I reckon they wouldn't take no stock in a juice harp."
"Yes, they would. They don't care what kind of music 'tis. A juice harp's plenty good enough for a rat. All animals like music. In a prison they dote on it. Specially painful music, and you can't get no other kind out of a juice harp. It always interests them. They come out to see what's the matter with you. Yes, you're all right. You're fixed very well. You want to set on your bed nights before you go to sleep, and early in the mornings, and play your juice harp. Play 'The Last Link is Broken.' That's the thing that'll scoop a rat quicker'n anything else. And when you've played about 2 minutes you'll see all the rats and the snakes and spiders and things begin to feel worried about you and come, and they'll just fairly swarm over you and have a noble good time."
"Yes, dey will, I reckon, Mars Tom, but what kinder time is Jim havin'? Blest if I can see de p'int. But I'll do it if I got to. I reckon I better keep de animals satisfied and not have no trouble in de house."
Tom waited to think it over, and see if there wasn't nothing else, and pretty soon he says, "Oh, there's one thing I forgot. Could you raise a flower here, do you reckon?" "I don't know but maybe I could, Mars Tom, but it's tolerable dark in here, and I ain't got no use for no flour nohow, and she'd be a powerful sight of trouble." "Well, you try it anyway. Some other prisoners has done it." "One of dem big cat-tail looking mullen stalks would grow in here, Mars Tom, I reckon, but she wouldn't be wuth half the trouble she'd cost." "Don't you believe it. We'll fetch you a little one, and you plant it in the corner over there and raise it, and don't call it mullen, call it pitiola, that's its right name when it's in a prison, and you want to water it with your tears." "Why, I got plenty of spring water, Mars Tom." "You don't want spring water, you want to water it with your tears. It's the way they always do." "Why, Mars Tom, I lay I can raise one er dem mullen stalks twice with the spring water whilst another man's starting one with tears." "That ain't the idea. You got to do it with tears." "She'll die on my hands, Mars Tom, she sho'ly will, 'cause I don't scarcely ever cry." So Tom was stumped. But he studied it over, and then said Jim would have to worry along the best he could with an onion. He promised he would go to the nigger cabins and drop one private in Jim's coffee pot in the morning. Jim said he would just as soon have tobacco in his coffee, and found so much fault with it, and with the work and bother of raising the mullen, and Jews harping the rats, and petting and flattering up the snakes and spiders and things, on top of all the other work he had to do on pens, and inscriptions, and journals and things, which made it more trouble and worry and responsibility to be a prisoner than anything he ever undertook, that Tom most lost all patience with him, and said he was just loading down with more gaudier chances than a prisoner ever had in the world to make a name for himself, and yet he didn't know enough to appreciate them, and they was just about wasted on him. So Jim he was sorry, and said he wouldn't behave so no more, and then me and Tom shoved for bed.